After my wife passed away, her business partner called me. I found something in her office. Come to the office right now. She warned, don't tell your son or your daughter-in-law. Your life could be in danger. When I got to the office and saw who was waiting at the door with her, my blood ran cold. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The funeral home smell still clung to my clothes 3 days later. That mixture of flowers and formaldehyde that somehow makes death feel more real than it should. I was sitting in Lisa's favorite chair, the blue velvet one she'd bought at an estate sale 15 years ago, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours before. The house felt wrong without her. 65 years old, and I'd never lived alone. We'd been married for 42 years, and even during her final illness, she'd filled every corner of this place with her presence. Now the silence was so thick I could barely breathe through it. Leonard had been by earlier, of course. My son always showed up when he needed something, and grief had a way of making his needs feel more urgent. He'd sat across from me with that concerned expression he wore whenever he wanted money, talking about getting Dad settled and making sure everything's in order. You can't just sit here forever, he'd said, glancing around the living room like he was appraising it. This house is too big for one person. Maybe it's time to think about downsizing. I'd nodded and made the right sounds, but something in his tone bothered me. Leonard had never cared about my comfort before. When Lisa was sick, he'd visited maybe twice a month, always with his wife, Sarah, in tow. Always with some excuse about why they couldn't stay long. The phone rang at exactly 4:30 in the afternoon, jolting me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed Margaret's name and my stomach tightened. Margaret Chen had been Lisa's business partner for 8 years, running a small but successful interior design firm together. She'd spoken beautifully at the funeral, sharing stories about Lisa's creativity and kindness that had made me cry all over again. Walter? Her voice was strained, urgent in a way I'd never heard before. I need you to come to the office right now. I set down my cold coffee. Margaret, I don't think I'm ready to deal with business matters yet. Maybe next week we could… No. The word came out sharp, desperate. Walter, I found something in Lisa's office. Something you need to see immediately. My chest tightened. What kind of something? There was a pause and I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Don't tell your son. Don't tell anyone you're coming here. Just come now. Margaret, you're scaring me. Good, she said, and the line went dead. I sat there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. Lisa had always trusted Margaret completely. In 8 years of partnership, I'd never known them to have a serious disagreement. Margaret was careful, methodical, not the type of person to create drama or panic without good reason. I grabbed my keys and headed for the car, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe Lisa had left some kind of final instructions about the business. Maybe there were debts I didn't know about, or legal issues that needed immediate attention. The drive to their office normally took 20 minutes, but I made it in 15, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. The interior design showroom occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian house downtown. Lisa had fallen in love with the space the moment she saw it, drawn to the high ceilings and original hardwood floors. She and Margaret had spent months renovating it, turning it into something that felt more like an elegant home than a business. Margaret's car was in the parking lot, but so was another vehicle I didn't recognize, a dark sedan with tinted windows. My unease deepened as I approached the front door. Through the large windows I could see Margaret pacing in the main showroom, her usually perfect composure completely shattered. The door chimed as I entered, and Margaret spun around to face me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her normally immaculate black hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Walter, thank God. She rushed toward me, her hands shaking. I didn't know what to do. I've been going through Lisa's files, trying to get everything organized for the accountant, and I found… She stopped, pressing her lips together. Found what? Margaret glanced toward the back office, then back at me. There's someone here who needs to talk to you. Someone Lisa hired without telling either of us. Before I could ask what she meant, a man emerged from the hallway that led to Lisa's private office. He was maybe 50, wearing a rumpled grey suit and carrying a manila folder thick with papers. Everything about him screamed private investigator. from his worn leather briefcase to the way his eyes immediately catalogued every detail of my appearance. "Mr. Thompson," he said, extending a calloused hand, "I'm Detective Ray Morrison, retired. Your wife hired me 6 weeks before she died." The words hit me like a physical blow. 6 weeks before Lisa died, she'd been in the hospital, weak and confused from the medications. The idea that she'd been lucid enough to hire a private investigator seemed impossible. "I don't understand," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "Lisa never mentioned hiring anyone." Morrison's expression was grim. "She was very specific about that. Said she needed to keep this investigation completely confidential until after her death. She was afraid of what might happen if certain people found out she was looking into things." Margaret wrapped her arms around herself, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Walter, she was investigating Leonard." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "What?" Morrison opened his folder and pulled out a photograph. It showed Leonard coming out of a casino, but that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the expression on his face, wild, desperate, the look of a man who'd lost everything and was about to lose more. "Your wife suspected your son was stealing from the business," Morrison said quietly. "She hired me to confirm it." I sank into one of the display chairs, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "That's impossible. Leonard has his own income. He and Sarah are doing well." Margaret and Morrison exchanged a look that made my stomach churn. "Mr. Thompson," Morrison said, sitting down across from me, "your son has been systematically embezzling money from your wife's business for over 2 years. Small amounts at first, but it escalated quickly once he realized no one was watching." He handed me a stack of bank statements with entries highlighted in yellow. The numbers swam in front of my eyes, but the pattern was clear. Regular withdrawals, always just under the threshold that would trigger automatic alerts, always with Leonard's authorization codes. "Lisa gave him access to the business accounts?" I asked weakly. "She trusted him," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "She wanted to help when he said he was having some temporary cash flow problems. She never imagined—" Morrison pulled out another document. "The total amount stolen over 24 months is approximately $87,000. The number hit me like a punch to the chest. $87,000, Lisa's life savings, the money she'd planned to leave me, the security we'd built over 4 decades of marriage. "But that's not the worst part," Morrison continued, his voice careful and measured. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to understand that your wife didn't just die from her illness." The world stopped. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, could feel Margaret's hand on my shoulder, but nothing else seemed real. "What are you saying?" Morrison leaned forward, his eyes never leaving mine. "Your wife discovered the theft 3 weeks before she died. She confronted your son about it, threatened to go to the police unless he returned every penny. And 2 days later she was dead." The silence that followed felt like falling into a deep, dark hole. Margaret was crying quietly beside me, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I'd just heard. "You think Leonard—" I couldn't finish the sentence. Morrison nodded grimly. "I think your wife was murdered, Mr. Thompson. And I think your son killed her to keep her quiet about the money." The room spun around me as 24 years of raising Leonard flashed through my mind. Every birthday party, every graduation, every time I'd been proud to call him my son. And now this stranger was telling me that the boy I'd loved and supported had taken everything from us. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I realized I wasn't entirely surprised. I couldn't sleep that night. Morrison's words echoed in my head like a broken record. "I think your son killed her." Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Leonard's face, but not the way it looked now. I saw him at 8 years old, crying because he'd broken Lisa's favorite vase. I saw him at 16, awkward and nervous before his first date. I saw him at 25, walking down the aisle at his wedding while Lisa dabbed tears from her eyes. How do you reconcile those memories with the possibility that the person you raised, the child you loved unconditionally, might be capable of murder? Morrison had given me his card and told me to call him in the morning. Margaret had offered to drive me home, but I'd insisted on managing alone, though I'd barely made it without running a red light. My hands had been shaking so badly I could hardly grip the steering wheel. Now I sat in Lisa's chair again, watching the sun rise through the kitchen window, holding a cup of coffee I couldn't taste. The house felt different somehow, like every shadow might be hiding another terrible secret. How many other things had Lisa kept from me in those final weeks? How many other signs had I missed? The phone rang at exactly 8 o'clock. Leonard's name appeared on the caller ID, and my heart started pounding before I even answered. "Hey, Dad." His voice was casual, almost cheerful. "I was thinking I'd stop by this morning. Sarah made that banana bread you like, and we thought you might want some company." I stared at the phone, searching his tone for any hint of guilt or deception. But he sounded exactly like he always did, slightly patronizing, like he was doing me a favor by paying attention to me. That's nice, Leonard, but I'm not really feeling up to visitors today." There was a pause. "Dad, you can't just isolate yourself. Mom wouldn't want that. You need to start getting back to normal." Normal. As if there was anything normal about discovering your son might have killed your wife. "Maybe tomorrow," I said, my voice coming out weaker than I intended. "No, Dad, I'm coming over. We need to talk about some practical things anyway. About the house, about Mom's business, about getting your affairs in order." The line went dead before I could protest. I sat there for a moment, panic rising in my chest. Leonard was coming here, to this house, and I had no idea how to look at him without seeing Morrison's photographs, without hearing his accusations. I called Morrison's number with trembling fingers. "Mr. Thompson." His voice was immediately alert. "How are you holding up?" "Leonard's coming over. I don't think I can face him alone, not after what you told me yesterday." There was a pause. "I understand. Would you like me to be there?" "Yes, please, but Leonard can't know you are involved. He can't know that I know anything." "I'll park around the corner and come in through your back door. Just act normal. Let him say what he's going to say. Sometimes the guilty ones reveal more than they realize when they think they're safe." 30 minutes later, Morrison was sitting at my kitchen table, a small recording device hidden in his jacket pocket. We'd agreed he would stay out of sight unless Leonard said something incriminating. Through the living room window, I watched my son pull into the driveway in his expensive BMW, a car I'd never understood how he could afford on his salary. Leonard knocked twice before using his key to let himself in. "Dad, where are you?" "In the living room," I called out, my voice barely steady. He appeared in the doorway carrying a foil-wrapped loaf and wearing that concerned expression I'd grown to hate. But now, looking at him with Morrison's accusations fresh in my mind, I noticed things I'd never seen before. The way his eyes immediately scanned the room, cataloging everything valuable. The way he checked his expensive watch, a watch that probably cost more than most people made in a month. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes. "You look terrible, Dad. Have you been sleeping?" I shrugged. "It's hard without your mother." Leonard set the banana bread on the coffee table and sat down across from me, leaning forward with exaggerated concern. "That's exactly what Sarah and I wanted to talk to you about. You can't just waste away in this big house, surrounded by memories. It's not healthy." "I'm managing fine." "No, you're not." His tone shifted slightly, becoming more assertive. "Look around, Dad. This place is falling apart. The gutters need cleaning. The yard looks like hell, and you're clearly not taking care of yourself. Mom's been gone less than a week, and you're already letting everything go." I felt anger flare in my chest. "Your mother died, Leonard. I'm grieving. And that's normal, but practical things still need to be handled." He pulled out a manila folder I hadn't noticed him carrying. "I've been doing some research, and I think we need to make some decisions about your future." The folder was full of brochures for senior living communities, expensive ones, judging by the glossy photographs of smiling elderly people playing cards and gardening. "I'm not moving to a nursing home," I said firmly. "It's not a nursing home, Dad. These are active adult communities. You'd have your own apartment, but with support services when you need them. And the best part is, you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this house anymore." I stared at the brochures, understanding flooding through me like ice water. "You want me to sell the house. I want you to be practical. This house is worth at least $400,000, probably more. That money could pay for a really nice place at one of these communities with enough left over to ensure you're comfortable for the rest of your life. $400,000. I thought about the $87,000 Leonard had already stolen from Lisa's business. Was the house his next target? And what about Lisa's business? I asked carefully. Margaret and I haven't had a chance to discuss what happens next. Leonard's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, that's another thing we need to address. Mom's business was really more of a hobby than a serious enterprise. Margaret's a nice woman, but she doesn't have the business experience to keep things running. I think the smartest thing would be to liquidate everything and add that money to your retirement fund. Liquidate. Such a clinical word for destroying everything Lisa had built, everything she'd been proud of. Margaret seems to think the business is doing well, I said. Margaret doesn't want to lose her job. Of course she's going to tell you everything's fine. Leonard leaned back, his tone becoming more patronizing. Dad, I know this is all overwhelming. That's why Sarah and I want to help you make these decisions. We've been talking to a financial advisor who specializes in elder care planning. Elder care planning. As if I were some incompetent old man who couldn't manage his own affairs. What if I don't want to sell the house? I asked. Leonard's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold flash in his eyes. Dad, be reasonable. You're 65 years old, you're living alone for the first time in your life, and you're clearly not coping well. Sarah and I just want what's best for you. And if I refuse? The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken threats. Finally, Leonard sighed dramatically. Then we'll have to consider other options. Sarah's been researching guardianship procedures, just in case you become unable to make sound decisions for yourself. The words hit me like a physical blow. Guardianship. They were threatening to have me declared incompetent if I didn't cooperate with their plans. You would do that to me? We would do that for you, Dad. Sometimes families have to make hard choices to protect the people they love. I thought about Lisa lying in her hospital bed, weak and trusting, giving Leonard access to her business accounts. I thought about Morrison's photographs of Leonard at the casino, desperate and wild-eyed. I thought about the $87,000 that was supposed to be my security, my future. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. Leonard stood up, smoothing down his expensive suit jacket. Of course, but don't take too long. The longer you wait, the harder these transitions become. He paused at the door, his tone shifting to something that might have been genuine concern if I didn't know better. We love you, Dad. We just want to take care of you the way you took care of us. After he left, I sat in the silence for a long time before Morrison emerged from the kitchen. His expression was grim. Did you get all that? I asked. He nodded, patting his jacket pocket. Every word. Mr. Thompson, your son just threatened you with guardianship proceedings if you don't sign over your assets. Combined with the embezzlement evidence, it's painting a very clear picture of his motives. But it's still not proof that he killed Lisa. Morrison was quiet for a moment, then pulled out another folder from his briefcase. Actually, about that. I got the preliminary results from Lisa's medical records review this morning. My heart stopped. And? Your wife's medication levels were inconsistent with her prescribed dosages. Someone had been altering them, Mr. Thompson. Someone with access to her hospital room, someone she trusted enough to let them handle her pills. I closed my eyes, feeling the last of my illusions crumble. My son hadn't just stolen our money. He'd killed his own mother to keep her quiet about it. And now he was coming for everything else we'd built together. But this time I wasn't going to let him win. I didn't sleep for 3 days after Morrison showed me the medical records. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lisa in her hospital bed, trusting and vulnerable, while Leonard sat beside her with those pills in his hand. The pills that were supposed to help her, but that he'd turned into weapons. Morrison had been patient with me, calling every morning to check in, but I could hear the urgency in his voice. We needed to move forward. The longer we waited, the more time Leonard had to cover his tracks or disappear entirely. Mr. Thompson, Morrison said during our Thursday morning call, I think it's time to confront him. Not to accuse him directly, but to see how he reacts when he knows we're getting close to the truth. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. I don't know if I can do this, Ray. He's my son. He's also your wife's killer. And if we don't stop him, he's going to take everything you have left and probably find a way to make you disappear too. The words hit me like cold water. Leonard had already threatened me with guardianship proceedings. What would stop him from having me committed to some facility where I'd be helpless and isolated? What would stop him from simply waiting for me to die naturally and inheriting everything anyway? What do you want me to do? Invite him over for dinner. Tell him you've been thinking about his suggestions and you want to discuss the house sale. I'll be listening from the kitchen, recording everything. When the time is right, we'll spring our evidence on him. I scheduled the dinner for Saturday night. Leonard seemed pleased when I called, probably thinking he'd finally broken down my resistance. That's great, Dad. Sarah will be so relieved that you are being reasonable about this. Will Sarah be coming too? Of course. We're in this together, as a family. Family. The word made my stomach turn. Saturday arrived grey and cold, with the kind of October wind that strips the last leaves from the trees. I spent the day cooking Lisa's famous pot roast, the one Leonard had always loved as a child. It felt strange preparing her recipe without her guidance, but I needed everything to seem normal. Morrison arrived at 5 o'clock, carrying a briefcase full of evidence and that same small recording device. We went over the plan one more time. I would let Leonard talk, let him reveal his plans for my future, and then we'd present him with the proof of his crimes. Remember, Morrison said, don't let him leave without hearing everything we have to say. Men like this, when they're cornered, they either break down and confess or they run. Either way, we need to see his reaction. Leonard and Sarah arrived precisely at 6:30, looking like the perfect suburban couple they pretended to be. Sarah carried a bottle of expensive wine and one of her forced smiles. Leonard wore a navy blazer and khakis, the uniform of a man trying to look respectable. Dad, you look better, Sarah said, kissing my cheek with lips that felt cold against my skin. I'm so glad you decided to be practical about your situation. We sat down to dinner and for the first 20 minutes everything seemed normal. Leonard complimented the pot roast, Sarah talked about their latest vacation plans, and I made appropriate responses while my heart hammered against my ribs. Then Leonard cleared his throat and pulled out a folder. Dad, Sarah and I have been doing more research and we've found the perfect place for you. He spread out brochures for Sunset Manor, an upscale assisted living facility about 30 miles away. The photographs showed elderly residents smiling as they participated in arts and crafts activities and gardening clubs. It's really beautiful, Sarah said, her voice bright with artificial enthusiasm. They have 24-hour medical care, 3 meals a day, and a wonderful social program. You'd make so many new friends. I looked at the brochures, noting the fine print. It's quite expensive. How would I afford this? Leonard and Sarah exchanged a quick glance. Well, that's where the house sale comes in. We've already contacted a realtor and she thinks we could list it for $450,000. After closing costs and realtor fees, you'd clear about $400,000. You've already contacted a realtor? Just to get an estimate, Leonard said quickly. Nothing formal, but Dad, time is of the essence here. The real estate market is good right now, but that could change. I set down my fork, my appetite completely gone. And what about Lisa's business? Sarah's smile tightened. Leonard's been talking to Margaret about that. She's willing to buy out your share for $75,000. $75,000. Lisa's business was worth at least 3 times that. But they were counting on my ignorance and grief to accept their lowball offer. That seems low, I said carefully. Leonard's jaw tensed almost imperceptibly. Dad, Margaret's being generous. The business has been struggling since Mom got sick. Most of their clients have already moved on to other designers. It was a lie and we all knew it. Margaret had told me just yesterday that they had a waiting list of new clients. I think I should talk to Margaret myself before making any decisions, I said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Leonard set down his wine glass with a sharp click against the table. Dad, I don't think that's a good idea. Margaret's obviously going to tell you whatever she thinks you want to hear. She doesn't want to lose her job. Maybe I should get an independent appraisal of the business value. Sarah's laugh was high and artificial. Oh, Walter, there's really no need for all that. Leonard understands these things much better than we do. He's been managing investments for years. Managing investments. Like he'd been managing Lisa's business accounts when he stole $87,000 from them. I took a deep breath, knowing there was no going back from what I was about to say. Leonard, I need to ask you something directly. Something flickered in his eyes, awareness, maybe fear. Of course, Dad. Why did you need access to your mother's business accounts? The silence that followed was deafening. Leonard's face went completely blank, the mask he'd been wearing for years finally slipping away. Sarah's smile faltered, and she reached for her wine glass with trembling fingers. I don't know what you mean, Leonard said finally, but his voice sounded different, harder. The $87,000 you withdrew over the past 2 years. What did you need that money for? Leonard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I think you are confused, Dad. The grief is making you paranoid. I'm not confused. I have bank statements. Sarah jumped up too, her face pale. Leonard, maybe we should go. Your father is obviously not thinking clearly. But Leonard wasn't moving toward the door. Instead, he stepped closer to me, his expression shifting into something I'd never seen before, something cold and calculating. Dad, you need to be very careful about making accusations you can't prove. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I can prove it. That's when Morrison stepped out of the kitchen, his badge visible on his belt, the recording device in his hand. Leonard Thompson, I'm Detective Ray Morrison, retired. Your father is telling the truth. We have evidence of your embezzlement from your mother's business. Leonard's face went white, then red, then white again. Sarah let out a small whimper and sank back into her chair. This is entrapment, Leonard said, but his voice was shaking now. You can't record people without their consent. Actually, in this state, I can, Morrison replied calmly. Your father gave me permission to record this conversation, and we have much more than just the financial records. Morrison opened his briefcase and spread out the casino photographs, the altered medical records, the timeline showing Leonard's visits to Lisa's hospital room. We know you killed your mother, Leonard. We know you altered her medications to cause the complications that led to her death. We know you did it to stop her from exposing your theft. Leonard stared at the evidence spread across the dining room table, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. For a moment I thought he might collapse. Then something in his expression hardened, and when he looked at me, I saw pure hatred. You have no idea what you've done, he said, his voice low and venomous. Mom was going to ruin everything. She was going to destroy our family over money that should have been mine anyway. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Leonard, stop talking. But Leonard was beyond stopping. Years of resentment and entitlement came pouring out. Do you know how much I've sacrificed for this family? How many opportunities I've passed up because you and Mom never had enough money for the things that mattered? I worked so hard to build something for myself, for my wife, and Mom was going to take it all away over some business account. So you killed her, I said, the words feeling surreal as they left my mouth. Leonard's laugh was bitter and broken. I didn't kill her. I just stopped enabling her. Those pills were making her weak and confused anyway. I was doing her a favor. Morrison stepped forward. Leonard Thompson, you're under arrest for the murder of Lisa Thompson and the embezzlement of $87,000 from Thompson Chen Interior Design. As Morrison read him his rights, Leonard looked at me one last time. I hope you're happy, Dad. I hope destroying your only son was worth it. I watched my son being handcuffed in the dining room where we'd shared countless family dinners, and all I could think was that I'd already lost my only son. The boy I'd raised and loved had disappeared somewhere along the way, replaced by this stranger who could kill his own mother for money. Sarah was crying hysterically, begging Leonard to tell her this was all a mistake, that he hadn't really done these things, but I could see in her eyes that she already knew the truth. As the police car pulled away with Leonard in the back seat, I stood alone in my driveway, feeling empty and exhausted. The October wind cut through my jacket, and I realized I was shivering. Morrison put a gentle hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Walter. I nodded, though it didn't feel right. It felt like the end of everything I'd believed about my family, about my life, about the man I'd tried to raise my son to become. But as I looked back at the house Lisa and I had built together, I knew she would have been proud of me for finally standing up to the person who had taken everything from us. The house felt like a mausoleum after the police took Leonard away, I sat in Lisa's chair, staring at the dining room where everything had unraveled just hours before. The dinner plates were still on the table. Leonard's wine glass still held the last sip he'd taken before Morrison revealed the truth. Everything looked normal, but nothing would ever be normal again. I just poured myself a whiskey, the first drink I'd had since Lisa's funeral, when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Sarah standing on my front porch, her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her perfect blonde hair disheveled. She was alone. I almost didn't answer. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and I had nothing left to say to her. But something in her posture, the way she was hugging herself against the cold, made me open the door. "Walter, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you." I stepped aside and let her in, though every instinct told me this was a mistake. Sarah had always been Leonard's ally, his co-conspirator in every scheme to extract money or favors from Lisa and me. Whatever she wanted now, it wouldn't be good. She followed me into the living room and perched on the edge of the couch, her hands twisted together in her lap. Up close, I could see that her expensive makeup was smeared, her designer clothes wrinkled. She looked like a woman whose world had just collapsed. "Walter, I had no idea," she began, her voice trembling. "I swear to you, I had no idea Leonard was stealing money from Lisa's business." I took a sip of my whiskey, studying her face. "But you knew about the gambling." Her shoulders sagged. "Yes, I knew about that. And you knew he was in debt." "Yes. And you knew he was desperate for money." She nodded, tears starting to fall again. "But I never thought he would. I never imagined he could hurt Lisa. She was his mother." I wanted to believe her. Part of me needed to believe that someone in my family wasn't completely corrupted by greed and selfishness. But I'd been naive about Leonard for years, and I wasn't going to make the same mistake with Sarah. "Tell me about the guardianship threat," I said quietly. Sarah's face crumpled. "That was Leonard's idea. He said you weren't thinking clearly, that grief was making you irrational. He said someone needed to protect you from making bad financial decisions. Like refusing to sell my house and give him the money. Walter, you have to understand we're in terrible trouble." The words came out in a rush, desperate and pleading. "Leonard owes money to some very dangerous people. People who don't just take your house when you can't pay them back." I set down my glass, my blood running cold. "What kind of people?" "Loan sharks, bookies. I don't know all the details, but Leonard borrowed heavily to cover his gambling losses. He kept saying he just needed one. Big win to get even, but it never came." She was sobbing now, her words barely coherent. "They've been calling the house, following us. Last week someone broke into Leonard's car and left a threatening note. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Leonard hadn't just been stealing to feed his gambling addiction. He'd been stealing to stay alive." "How much does he owe?" Sarah wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Over $200,000. $200,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. Even if Leonard had successfully stolen everything from Lisa's business and forced me to sell the house, it wouldn't have been enough to cover his debts." "Sarah, why are you telling me this now?" She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Because they're not going to stop coming after the money just because Leonard's in jail. They know about you, Walter. They know about this house, about Lisa's business. They think you're hiding assets." A chill ran down my spine. "They think I have Leonard's money? They think Leonard was working with you. They think you knew about everything and helped him hide the stolen money." She leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Walter, you're in danger. We're all in danger." I stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to scan the street. Everything looked normal. Empty sidewalks, parked cars, the familiar glow of streetlights. But now every shadow seemed threatening, every unfamiliar vehicle suspicious. "What do you want me to do about it, Sarah?" "Help me pay them off. Leonard's bail is set at $50,000. If we can get him out, maybe he can negotiate with these people, work out some kind of payment plan." I turned back to face her, incredulous. "You want me to bail out the man who killed my wife?" "Walter, please try to understand. Leonard made terrible mistakes, but he's not a cold-blooded killer. He was desperate, panicked. The medication thing. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe he just got confused about the dosages." "The medical examiner's report was very clear, Sarah. Someone systematically altered Lisa's medication over a period of weeks. That's not confusion, that's murder. Sarah's face hardened, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the calculating woman who had helped Leonard plan my financial ruin. Fine, maybe Leonard did something unforgivable. But that doesn't change the fact that these men are going to come after everyone in this family until they get their money. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you both decided to steal from us. We didn't have a choice. Sarah's voice rose, desperation making her reckless. Do you know what it's like to be married to a man who can't sleep at night because he's afraid of what might happen to you? Who jumps every time the phone rings? Who checks the locks on all the doors 3 times before bed? I know what it's like to be married to someone who was slowly dying while her own son poisoned her. I shot back. So forgive me if I don't have much sympathy for Leonard's insomnia. Sarah stared at me for a long moment, then her expression shifted again. The desperate, crying woman disappeared, replaced by someone harder and more calculating. Walter, I'm trying to save your life. These people don't care about your moral outrage or your grief. They want their money and they'll do whatever it takes to get it. Let me be very clear about something, Sarah. I don't have Leonard's gambling debts. I don't have the money he stole from Lisa's business. And I'm not responsible for cleaning up the mess you two created. She stood up abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. You're making a huge mistake. These men know where you live, Walter. They know your routines, your habits. They know you're a 65-year-old man living alone in a big house with no security system. The threat was unmistakable, and suddenly I understood why Sarah had really come here. This wasn't just a desperate plea for help. It was an attempt to terrorize me into giving them money. Get out of my house, I said quietly. Walter, please, I'm begging you. Just the bail money. Just $50,000 and Leonard can try to work something out with these people. Get out. Sarah's mask finally slipped completely. You selfish old man. You'd rather see your whole family destroyed than help us when we need you most. My family is already destroyed, Sarah. Leonard saw to that when he killed Lisa. She stared at me with pure hatred, then grabbed her purse and headed for the door, but she paused in the doorway, turning back one last time. You know what Lisa used to say about you, Walter. She used to say you were weak, that you'd rather hide from problems than face them. I guess she was right. The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone with the echo of her words. I stood in the hallway for a long time, my heart pounding, before walking to the front window and watching her drive away. Lisa had never said anything like that about me. Sarah was just trying to hurt me, to plant seeds of doubt about my marriage in addition to everything else she'd tried to destroy tonight. But as I locked the door behind her and checked the deadbolt twice, I realized something important. I wasn't the weak man Sarah thought I was. The weak Walter would have given her the money, would have bailed Leonard out of jail, would have spent the rest of his life paying for crimes he didn't commit. But that Walter had died in the hospital room with Lisa. This Walter, the one who had the courage to investigate his own son, who had the strength to confront a killer, who had the wisdom to see through Sarah's manipulation. This Walter wasn't going to be anyone's victim. I poured myself another whiskey and settled into Lisa's chair, but this time I wasn't thinking about the past. I was thinking about the future, about the life I was going to build without the people who had tried to destroy me. Tomorrow I would call Morrison and tell him about Sarah's threats. Tomorrow I would change all the locks and install a security system. Tomorrow I would start the process of truly moving on. But tonight I was just going to sit in my wife's chair and remember what it felt like to choose myself over the people who had never really loved me at all. The security system installation took 3 hours, but it was worth every penny of the $2,000 it cost. After Sarah's visit, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching the house. Every car that drove by slowly made my heart race. Every unfamiliar face in the grocery store made me wonder if they were connected to Leonard's debts. Morrison had taken Sarah's threats seriously. These kinds of criminals don't usually go after family members, he'd told me over the phone, but $200,000 is enough to make some people desperate. Better safe than sorry. He'd also given me an update on Leonard's case. The district attorney was confident they could make the murder charges stick, especially with Leonard's recorded confession from dinner. The embezzlement charges were ironclad. My son was looking at 25 years to life. I should have felt satisfaction or at least some sense of closure. Instead, I just felt empty. Leonard was in jail, Sarah was out of my life, and I was alone in a house that felt too big and too quiet. The security cameras gave me peace of mind, but they couldn't fill the silence where Lisa's laughter used to be. It was Margaret who suggested I come back to the office. "You don't have to work," she'd said during one of our weekly phone calls. "But maybe it would help to be around Lisa's things, to feel connected to the business you both built." So, on a grey Thursday morning in November, I drove to the interior design showroom for the first time since Morrison had revealed Leonard's crimes. Margaret was waiting for me with coffee and one of her gentle smiles. "I've been keeping Lisa's office exactly as she left it," she said, leading me down the familiar hallway. "I thought maybe you'd want to go through her personal things when you were ready." Lisa's office was a reflection of her personality, organized but warm, professional but personal. Her drafting table still held sketches for a project she'd never finished. Her bulletin board was covered with photographs of completed rooms, thank you notes from clients, and a picture of Leonard and Sarah from their wedding day. I stared at that wedding photo for a long time. Lisa had been so proud that day, so happy to see Leonard settled and successful. She'd spent hours helping Sarah plan the reception, insisting on paying for the flowers herself because she wanted everything to be perfect for her son. "How did we miss it?" I asked Margaret, who was quietly sorting through files at Lisa's desk. "How did we not see what he really was?" Margaret looked up, her expression sad but understanding. "Because we loved him. Because we wanted to believe the best of him. Because parents aren't supposed to suspect their children of being capable of evil." I picked up a small ceramic paperweight Lisa had bought during our anniversary trip to Italy 10 years earlier. It was painted with tiny flowers, delicate and beautiful. I could still remember her haggling with the vendor in broken Italian, determined to bring home something special. "There's something else you should know," Margaret said quietly. "Something I found in Lisa's files that I haven't told anyone yet." My heart started pounding. "What is it?" Margaret pulled out a thick manila envelope from the bottom drawer of Lisa's desk. "Letters. Lisa wrote them but never sent them. I think she was documenting everything, building a case against Leonard in case something happened to her." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of handwritten pages in Lisa's familiar script. Letters addressed to me, to the police, to Margaret. A complete record of Leonard's manipulation and theft, dating back over 2 years. The first letter was dated 6 months before Lisa died. "My dearest Walter, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and Leonard has probably tried to convince you it was natural. It wasn't. I've discovered that our son has been stealing from the business, and when I confronted him about it, he became angry in a way that frightened me. He told me that I was getting old and confused, that I was making mistakes with the books, but I know what I saw. I know what he did." I had to stop reading for a moment, my vision blurring with tears. Lisa had known. She'd known Leonard was dangerous, and she tried to protect me by documenting everything. The second letter was dated just 3 weeks before she died. "Walter, I showed Leonard the bank statements today. I told him I knew he'd been stealing and that he needed to return the money immediately or I would go to the police. He laughed at me. He actually laughed and said that nobody would believe a sick old woman over her successful son. He said that by the time I could prove anything, I'd be too dead or too crazy to matter. I'm scared, Walter. I'm scared of what our son has become." Margaret was crying softly as I read, her hands pressed to her mouth. There are more. She documented every conversation, every threat, every time he visited her in the hospital. I flipped through page after page of Lisa's careful handwriting. She'd recorded how Leonard had insisted on managing her medications, how he'd dismissed her concerns about feeling worse instead of better, how he'd slowly isolated her from friends and family by claiming she was too sick for visitors. The final letter was dated just 2 days before she died. "Walter, if you're reading this, then Leonard has killed me. I know how that sounds, but I'm not delirious from the medication. I'm dying because Leonard has been altering my pills. He thinks I don't notice, but I've been pretending to take them and hiding them instead. When I tested them myself using Margaret's brother's chemistry set, I found compounds that weren't supposed to be there. Our son is poisoning me, Walter. Our son is a murderer. Don't let him get away with it. Don't let him hurt you too. I love you with all my heart. Take care of yourself and remember that I'm finally free from pain." Lisa. I set the letter down with shaking hands. Lisa had known she was dying. She'd known Leonard was killing her, and she'd spent her final days documenting the truth so that I wouldn't be his next victim. She saved your life, Margaret said quietly. If she hadn't left all this evidence, Leonard might have succeeded in having you declared incompetent. He could have taken everything and then, well, accidents happen to elderly people all the time. I thought about Leonard's threats, his talk of guardianship proceedings, his insistence that I sell the house and move to an assisted living facility where I'd be isolated and vulnerable. Had that been his plan all along? Kill Lisa, steal everything I had, and then arrange for me to have some kind of accident so he could inherit whatever was left? There's one more thing, Margaret said, pulling out a small velvet box. Lisa asked me to give this to you if anything happened to her. Inside the box was Lisa's wedding ring, the simple gold band I'd placed on her finger 42 years ago. But there was something else too, a small key I didn't recognize. It's for a safety deposit box, Margaret explained. Lisa opened it 6 months ago. She said it was for important documents that needed to be kept safe from Leonard. The safety deposit box was at the bank where Lisa and I had done business for 20 years. The manager, Mrs. Chen, remembered Lisa well and offered her condolences before leading me to the vault. Inside the box was another manila envelope, this one containing copies of all the evidence Lisa had gathered, along with a note in her handwriting. Walter, I've also left $10,000 in cash in this box, money that Leonard doesn't know about. Use it to protect yourself. Use it to make sure he pays for what he's done. Don't mourn for me too long, my darling. Live the life we always planned to have together, just without the people who tried to destroy us. All my love, Lisa. I sat in the bank parking lot for a long time after that, holding Lisa's ring and thinking about the woman I'd been married to for 4 decades. She'd been braver than I'd ever given her credit for. She'd seen the truth about Leonard long before I had, and she'd risked everything to make sure I'd survive his betrayal. The $10,000 felt like a gift from beyond the grave, not just the money itself, but what it represented. Lisa's final act of love, her last attempt to take care of me even after she was gone. But more than that, it was validation. Proof that I wasn't the weak, confused old man Leonard and Sarah had tried to convince me I was. Lisa had trusted me with the truth because she knew I was strong enough to handle it, wise enough to use it, brave enough to seek justice for both of us. I drove home that evening with Lisa's ring on my finger and her letters on the passenger seat. Tomorrow I would give everything to Morrison and the district attorney. Leonard's defense lawyer would try to claim that Lisa had been hallucinating, that the medications had made her paranoid and delusional. But 42 years of marriage had taught me to recognize Lisa's voice, her clarity, her unwavering honesty. These letters were the final nail in Leonard's coffin. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something that surprised me. Peace. Lisa had fought for us until the very end. Now it was my turn to fight for her. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I sat in the front row every single day, watching as prosecutor after prosecutor laid out the evidence against my son. The embezzlement charges were straightforward. Bank records don't lie, and Leonard's gambling debts provided clear motive for the theft. But it was the murder charges that really mattered to me. The medical examiner testified about the altered medications found in Lisa's system. Morrison presented the timeline of Leonard's hospital visits, always coinciding with Lisa's worsening condition. The prosecutor read Lisa's letters aloud, her voice growing stronger with each revelation of Leonard's cruelty. Leonard's defense attorney tried everything. He claimed Lisa had been delusional from her illness, that her letters were the paranoid fantasies of a dying woman. He suggested that Leonard's casino visits were innocent entertainment, that the money transfers were legitimate loans between family members. He even tried to paint me as a vindictive father seeking revenge against a son who had simply tried to help his parents manage their finances. None of it worked. The evidence was too overwhelming, Leonard's recorded confession too damning. When the jury returned after only 4 hours of deliberation, I knew what their verdict would be before the foreman even spoke. Guilty on all charges. Leonard's sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. I debated whether to attend, whether I wanted to hear the judge pronounce the words that would send my son to prison for the rest of his life. In the end, I decided I owed it to Lisa to be there. Leonard looked smaller somehow, sitting at the defendant's table in his orange jumpsuit. The confident, manipulative man who had tried to steal my life had been replaced by someone broken and defeated. When the judge asked if he wanted to make a statement before sentencing, Leonard stood up slowly. "Your Honor, I want to say that I'm sorry for the pain I've caused my family." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I never intended for things to go as far as they did. I made terrible mistakes and I accept full responsibility for my actions." It wasn't really an apology. It was the same deflection and minimization Leonard had been using his entire life. He was sorry for the pain he'd caused, not for the crimes he'd committed. He'd made mistakes, as if killing his mother had been an accident instead of a calculated decision. But I didn't need his apology anyway. Lisa's letters had given me something more valuable than Leonard's remorse. They'd given me the truth. The judge sentenced Leonard to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder charge, plus an additional 15 years for the embezzlement. As the bailiff led him away, Leonard looked back at me one last time. I met his gaze steadily, without anger or hatred, and watched as he disappeared through the courtroom door. Sarah was waiting for me in the hallway outside. She testified for the prosecution, admitting her knowledge of Leonard's gambling debts and her participation in the scheme to force me to sell the house. In exchange for her cooperation, she'd received probation and community service. "Walter," she said as I walked past her toward the elevator, "I really am sorry for everything." I paused, studying her face. She looked genuinely remorseful, tired and aged by the stress of the trial, but I'd learned not to trust appearances when it came to my family. "I know you are, Sarah, but sorry doesn't bring Lisa back. I never knew what Leonard was really doing to her. You have to believe that." I pressed the button for the elevator. "It doesn't matter what I believe anymore. It's over." The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. Sarah called my name once more, but I didn't turn around. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. 6 months later, I was sitting in Lisa's chair again, but this time I wasn't alone. Margaret had stopped by after work, bringing Chinese takeout and updates on the business. We'd become partners officially after Leonard's conviction, with me inheriting Lisa's 50% share and Margaret maintaining her half. "The Henderson project is coming along beautifully," Margaret was saying, showing me photographs on her phone. Mrs. Henderson specifically requested that we use some of Lisa's design elements from the Murphy house. She said she wanted something that would honor Lisa's memory. I smiled, looking at the pictures. Lisa would have loved knowing that her work was inspiring other projects, that her creativity was living on through Margaret's hands. "And I have some other news," Margaret continued, her tone shifting to something more serious. "I got a call from a reporter today. Apparently, Leonard's case is being featured in some kind of true crime documentary. They want to interview you." I set down my lo mein, my appetite suddenly gone. "Absolutely not." "That's what I told them. But Walter, they're going to tell the story with or without your input. Might not hurt to make sure they get the facts right." I thought about it for a moment. Leonard's crimes had attracted media attention during the trial, but I'd managed to avoid most of the reporters. The idea of rehashing everything for television felt like opening old wounds. "Lisa wouldn't have wanted that kind of attention," I said finally. "She was a private person. She'd hate the idea of strangers picking apart our family's tragedy for entertainment." Margaret nodded. "I thought you'd say that. I'll tell them you're not interested." We finished dinner and Margaret helped me clean up, the companionable silence between us feeling more natural than any conversation I'd had with Leonard or Sarah in years. As she was getting ready to leave, Margaret paused at the front door. "Walter, I hope you know how proud Lisa would be of you. The way you fought for the truth, the way you didn't let Leonard destroy everything she built. She always said you were stronger than you gave yourself credit for." After Margaret left, I walked through the house Lisa and I had shared for so many years. The security system she'd never needed was still active, the cameras still recording everyone who came and went. But the house no longer felt like a fortress under siege. It felt like home again. I stopped in front of the mantelpiece, where I'd placed a new photograph next to our wedding picture. It was one of Lisa in her office, taken just a few months before she got sick. She was holding fabric samples, her face lit up with the joy she always felt when working on a new design. Margaret had found it while cleaning out Lisa's desk, and it captured everything I wanted to remember about my wife. Her creativity, her passion, her strength. On weekends, I volunteered at the local hospice, reading to patients who were facing their own final battles. It had been Lisa's idea, something she'd mentioned wanting to do when she retired. "Everyone deserves to have someone who cares about their story," she'd said. "Everyone deserves to be heard." The work was difficult sometimes, sitting with people who were dying, watching families struggle with grief and fear. But it was also meaningful in a way I'd never experienced before. These patients didn't want my money or my house or my business connections. They just wanted someone to listen, to treat them with dignity during their most vulnerable moments. One afternoon, an elderly woman named Rose grabbed my hand as I finished reading to her from a mystery novel. "You're a good man," she said, her voice barely audible. "Your wife was lucky to have you." "Actually," I said, squeezing her hand gently, "I was the lucky one." Driving home that evening, I realized that Rose was wrong about one thing. I wasn't the same good man Lisa had married 42 years earlier. That man had been naive, trusting, willing to overlook warning signs because he wanted to believe the best of people. That man had let his son slowly poison his wife while he remained obliviously grateful for Leonard's help with her care. The man I'd become was harder, more careful, less willing to extend blind trust. But he was also braver, more honest, more committed to protecting the people and things that truly mattered. He was the man Lisa had seen in me all along, the man she trusted with her final letters and her dying wishes. 2 years after Leonard's conviction, I still lived in the house we'd bought as newlyweds. I still slept on my side of the bed, still set 2 coffee cups on the counter each morning out of habit. But the silence no longer felt oppressive. Sometimes, usually late at night when the house was completely quiet, I could almost hear Lisa's voice reminding me that some kinds of love don't end with death. Leonard wrote to me occasionally from prison, letters that I never opened. Sarah had moved across the country, started over somewhere far from the scene of her failures. I wished them both well in an abstract way, but I no longer felt responsible for their happiness or their redemption. My responsibility now was simpler and more important, to live the life Lisa and I had planned together, to honor her memory by becoming the man she'd always believed I could be, and to make sure that the truth she'd died protecting would never be forgotten. On quiet Sunday mornings, I still sat in her blue velvet chair, drinking coffee that was no longer bitter, reading books she'd recommended, planning projects for the business we'd built together. The house was peaceful now, filled with good memories instead of terrible secrets. And sometimes, when the light hit the windows just right, I could almost convince myself that Lisa was still there with me. Proud of the strength I'd finally found, grateful for the justice I'd finally secured, and happy that I'd chosen love over fear, truth over comfort, dignity over family loyalty. It had taken me 67 years to learn that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go of the people who are determined to destroy you. But now that I understood that lesson, I was finally free to build the life I'd always wanted. A life worthy of the woman who'd love me enough to save me, even after death.